The teachings of Ramana Maharishi in his own words, the nature of man. The individual being which identifies its existence with that of life in the physical body as I is called the ego. The self, which is pure consciousness, has no ego sense about it. Neither can the physical body, which is inert in itself, have this ego sense. Between the two, that is, between the self or pure consciousness and the inert physical body, there arises mysteriously the ego sense or I notion, the hybrid which is neither of them, and this flourishes as an individual being. This ego or individual being is at the root of all that is futile and undesirable in life. Therefore, it is to be destroyed by any possible means. Then that whichever is alone remains resplendent. This is liberation or enlightenment or self realization. Devotee asks, Bhagavan often says, the world is not outside you, or everything depends on you, or what is there outside you. I find all this puzzling. The world existed before I was born and will continue to exist after my death, as it has survived the death of so many who once lived as I do now. Bhagwan said, did I ever say that the world exists because of you? I have only put to you the question, what exists apart from yourself? You ought to understand that by the self, neither the physical body nor the subtle body is meant. What you are told is that if you once know the self within, which all ideas exist, not excluding the idea of yourself, of others like you, and of the world, you can realize the truth that there is a reality, a supreme truth, which is the self of all. The world you now see, the self of all the selves, the one real, the supreme, the eternal self, as distinct from the ego or individual being, which is impermanent. You must not mistake the ego or the bodily idea for the self. Devotee asked, then Bhagwan means that the self is God. Bhagwan said, you see the difficulty. Self inquiry, who am I, is a different technique from the meditation, I am Shiva or I am He. I rather emphasize self knowledge, for you are first concerned with yourself before you proceed to know the world or its Lord. The I am He or I am Ram. Meditation is more or less mental, but the quest for the self of which I speak is a direct method and is superior to it. For the moment you get into the quest for the self and begin to go deeper, and the real self is waiting there to receive you, and then whatever is to be done is done by something else, and you as an individual have no hand in it. In this process all doubts and discussions are automatically given up, just as one who sleeps forgets all his cares for the time being. Devotee asked, what certainty is there that something awaits there to receive me? Bhagwan said, when a person is sufficiently mature, he becomes convinced naturally. Devotee asked, how is this maturity to be attained? Bhagwan said, various ways are prescribed, but whatever previous development there may be, earnest self inquiry hastens it. Devotee asked, that is arguing in a circle. I am strong enough for the quest if I am mature, and it is the quest that makes me mature. Bhagwan said, the mind doesn't have this sort of difficulty. It wants a fixed theory to satisfy itself with. Really, however, no theory is necessary for the man who seriously strives to approach God or his true self. Everyone is the self and indeed is infinite, yet each person mistakes his body for his self. In order to know anything, illumination is necessary. This can only be of the nature of light, however, it lights up both physical light and physical darkness. That is to say, that it lies beyond apparent light and darkness. It is itself neither, but it is said to be light because it illumines both. It is infinite and is consciousness. Consciousness is the self of which everyone is aware. No one is ever away from the self, and therefore everyone is in fact self realized only. And this is the great mystery. People do not know this and want to realize the self. Realization consists only in getting rid of the false idea that one is not realized. It is not anything new to be acquired, it must already exist, or it would not be eternal, and only what is eternal is worth striving for. Once the false notion, I am the body or I am not realized, has been removed, super consciousness or the self alone remains, and in people's present state of knowledge, they call this realization. But the truth is that realization is eternal and already exists here and now. Consciousness is pure knowledge. The mind arises out of it and is made up of thoughts. The essence of the mind is only awareness or consciousness. However, when the ego overclouds it, it functions as reasoning, thinking, or perceiving. The universal mind, not being limited by the ego, has nothing outside itself and is therefore only aware. This is what the Bible means by I am that I am. The ego ridden mind has its strength sapped and is too weak to resist distressing thoughts. The egoless mind is happy, as we see in deep, dreamless sleep. Clearly, therefore, happiness and distress are only modes of the mind. Devotee asks, when I see the I see nothing. But Bhagwan said, you say that because you are accustomed to identify yourself with the body and sight with the eyes. But what is there to be seen, and by whom and how? There is only one consciousness, and this, when it identifies itself with the body, projects itself through the eyes and sees the surrounding objects. The individual is limited to the waking state. He expects to see something different and accept the authority of his senses. He will not admit that he who sees the objects seen and the act of seeing are all manifestations of the same consciousness. The I meditation helps to overcome the illusion that the self is something to see. Actually, there is nothing to see. How do you recognize yourself now? Do you have a hold a mirror up in front of yourself to recognize yourself? The awareness is itself. The I realize it, and that is the truth. Devotee asked, when I inquire into the origin of thoughts, there is the perception of the I, but it doesn't satisfy me. Bhagwan said, quite right, because this perception of I is associated with the form, perhaps with the physical body. Nothing should be associated with the pure self. The self is the pure reality in whose light the body, the ego, and all else shine. When all thoughts are stilled, pure consciousness remains forever. Devotee asked, how did the ego arise? Bhagwan said, there is no ego. If there were, you would have to admit of two selves in you. Therefore, there is no ignorance. If you inquire into the self, ignorance which is already non existent will be found not to exist, and you will say that it has fled. Absence of thought doesn't mean a blank. There must be someone to be aware of that blank. Knowledge and ignorance pertain only to the mind and are in duality, but the self is beyond them both. It is pure light. This is no need for one self to see another. There are no two selves. What is not the self is mere non self and cannot see the self. The self has no sight or hearing, it lies beyond them, all alone as pure consciousness. Devotee asked, I don't know whether the self is different from the ego. Bhagwan said, in what state were you in deep sleep? Devotee said, I don't know. Bhagwan said, who doesn't know? The waking self, but you don't deny that you existed while in deep sleep. Devotee said, I was and am, but I don't know who was in deep sleep. Bhagwan said, exactly, the waking man says that he did not know anything in the state of deep sleep. Now he sees object and knows that he exists, but in deep sleep there were no objects and no spectator, and yet the same person who is speaking now existed in deep sleep also. What is the difference between the two states? There are objects and the play of the senses now, while in deep sleep there were not. A new entity, the ego, has arisen. It acts through the senses, sees objects, confuses itself with the body, and claims to be the self. In reality, what was in deep sleep continues to be now also. The self is changeless, it is the ego which has come between. That which rises and sets is the ego, that which remains changeless is the self. Bhagwan said, waking, dream, and sleep are mere phases of the mind, not of the self. The self is the witness of these three states. Your true nature exists in sleep. Devotee said, but we are advised not to fall asleep during meditation. Bhagwan said, it is stupor which you must guard against. That sleep which alternates with waking is not the true sleep. That waking which alternates with sleep is not the true waking. Are you awake now? No. What you have to do is to wake up to your true state. You should neither fall into false sleep nor remain falsely awake. Bhagwan said, though present even in sleep, the self is not then perceived. It cannot be known in sleep straight away. It must first be realized in the waking state, for it is our true nature underlying all the three states. Effort must be made in the waking state and the self realized here and now. It will then be understood to be the continuous self, uninterrupted by the alternation of waking, dream, and deep sleep.